to continue to fight through the months ahead for my personal vindication would almost totally absorb the time and attention of both the President and the Congress in a period when our entire focus should be on the great issues of peace abroad and prosperity without inflation at home. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
50 years ago today, Richard Nixon resigned from the presidency in the wake of Watergate. You just heard part of the speech from the day before announcing that decision. The scandal began 2 years earlier when the DNC headquarters located in the Watergate office building in D.C. were broken into. The investigations had revealed subsequently that Richard Nixon's participation was in the cover-up, and he remains to this day the only American president to resign from his post. Let's bring in our friend, Rogers Chair of the American Presidency at Vanderbilt University, historian Jon Meacham. John, that of course was a shocking moment in American political history. The next day, extraordinarily revealing. Richard Nixon said goodbye to his staff, said goodbye to some of his close friends, and in an address where he talked about his father being poor. He talked about his mother, and he had this confessional: always remember, others may hate you, but those who hate you don't win unless you hate them. And then you destroy yourself. His daughter Tricia, years later, would say it was the first time she was glad that people actually got to see her father as he really was, as he was sitting there talking personally about his family. But an extraordinary day 50 years ago. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. You know, President Nixon, I think it was Tom Wicker, argued this, and then Bob Dole picked it up at Nixon's funeral in 1994. In many ways, that was the age of Nixon. Our politics as we experience them now, in a way, are bracketed by both Nixon's Chequers speech in 1952, which was a massive television event at the dawn of the medium, and then the moment you just played was this incredible inflection point in the life of the post-war era. I think it was someone's wife who pointed out that JFK and Richard Nixon, their rise was that the young officers, the junior officers of World War II had finally come into command. And so it's this generational, seismic moment where you have this cohort of people who were, as President Kennedy said, tempered by war, and then guided us through the Cold War for good and for ill. And Nixon, in many ways, represents the best of us and the worst of us, and vivid political figures often do.
Yeah, and you said the best of us, the worst of us. It reminds me the title of Tom Wicker's book, a guy who studied Nixon as closely as anybody. One of us, one of us. Again, for better and for worse. You talk about the age of Nixon. If I'm not mistaken, more Americans voted for Richard Nixon. I could be mistaken, but this was the case at least 20 years ago. I don't think anybody's eclipsing. But, you know, Nixon, he got more national votes, I believe, than any person in American history. He ran on the national ticket in 52, in 56, in 60, in 68, and in 72. And, of course, in 72, along with LBJ and, I guess, FDR in 36 against Alf Landon. Those are three of the greatest landslides in American history. What was it about Richard Nixon that drew so many Americans to him in 72? And how remarkable of a system we have that a man that could be at the height of all powers in November of 1972 run out of office less than 2 years later because of his crimes.
Well, the rule of law worked. I mean, one of the things about Nixon, and this is an argument that both Wicker made, also our friend Evan Thomas, I highly recommend a book he published 7-8 years ago called Being Nixon, which is a terrific portrait of this this dichotomy, which, by the way, aren't we all? Aren't we all a mix of good and bad? And so I think to some extent, the American people recognized in Nixon, or enough American people, the people who voted for him, a representative figure. He was a striver. He had come out of Yorba Linda, California. He had not gone to Harvard. He'd gotten in, but didn't have the scholarship money, didn't have enough money. So he went to Whittier, always had a chip on his shoulder about that, was someone who was locked in this fundamental struggle for all those years with John Kennedy, for whom life had given almost every break. Nixon had gotten almost no breaks. Nixon represented the hardline side of the Cold War argument. And again, parenthetically, he was right about Alger Hiss. Right? I mean, that's, you know, there's a grain of truth, and it's not as simple as a lot of people want to make it. And I think what he tells us about America today, and this is vital in an age where Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, is that the constitutional system has withstood remarkable stresses and strains. And one of the things about Nixon is, yes, he broke the law, but in the end, he had a sense of shame. And he did what he did on August 8th, leaving on August 9th, 1974. And I think that for him, at the very end of the day, the Constitution, the country did matter.
Yeah, and he of course, the most important moment in the rule of law and the battle against Richard Nixon was the Supreme Court ruled against Nixon and to turn over the tapes, and immediately he knew it was over. There was no part of him that thought he would go on denying what the Supreme Court had told him he had to do and pushing back on it. And that is one of the great fears of what a second Donald Trump term may look like. You talked about Alger Hiss, and for younger people who didn't grow up during the age of Nixon, or even at the end of the age of Nixon, it's impossible to really understand why Richard Nixon would be so popular without understanding how the Cold War framed so much. I mean, my family raised my father, Cold Warrior. And so there was Nixon fighting against Alger Hiss, fighting against the communists in the 1950s as vice president, pushing back, taking a hard line. And so that was the Richard Nixon that was framed in the age, as you said, the age of Nixon. It was like Cold Warriors supported Richard Nixon. And yet, again, Nixon is an extraordinarily complicated political figure, Watergate aside. Yeah. You look at the horrible things about Nixon, whether you talk about Watergate, whether you talk about the bombing of Cambodia, whether you talk about undermining peace negotiations in 1968 to help get him elected in 68 against Humphrey. There's that side of it. Then you have Nixon, the Cold Warrior, opening China. Going to China, opening China. Yeah. You have Nixon, the hardline conservative, being the founder of the Environmental Protection Agency, and also Nixon fighting against more moderates in his administration, pushing for détente with the Soviets. Again, very complicated policy-wise. Richard Nixon would be, I think even Noam Chomsky one time said, about 30, 40 years later, that Richard Nixon would be seen as a left-wing radical by most Republicans, current-day Republicans.
Oh, my Lord. Absolutely. I mean, so one of the questions people ask is, how did we survive 1968? When you think about that tumultuous year, Tet, President Johnson gets out, McCarthy and RFK challenge him, Dr. King is killed, Senator Kennedy is killed, the Chicago Democratic Convention is chaotic, George Wallace gets 13.5% of the vote in November. incredibly fraught time. And I would argue that it's worth thinking about the fact that Nixon is part of the reason the Republic endured. Again, complicated, counterintuitive argument. A lot of people in the 212 area code, wouldn't agree with this. But the EPA, he proposed a health care plan to the left of President Obama's. He proposed a guaranteed family income. Remember the influence of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a domestic policy advisor, on the one hand, wanted to take Nixon into this kind of progressive Toryism. And again, the complications of life, the complexities of life, Daniel Patrick Moynihan arguing that on this side. And then you have Pat Buchanan and the political operation working the other side of the street. And so I think one of the things we've learned this summer anew is that anybody who thinks that history works in a straight line, or that there's somehow these clinical forces that always shape who we are and what happens, the Greeks had it right. Character is destiny, and character is complicated.